Bon après-midi. I'm Stephen Toop, President of the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here this afternoon for Congress 2016's fifth Big Thinking Lecture. I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot and the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. These include the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We're very appreciative of the great preparations undertaken by our host, the University of Calgary, for this week of Congress, and I'd like you to join me in thanking them for their great hospitality. J'aimerais signaler, avant de commencer, que nous proposons un service d'interprétation simultanée. Vous pourriez vous procurer des écouteurs à l'extérieur du théâtre. Je souhaite remercier le Conseil de recherche en sciences humaines, la Fondation canadienne pour l'innovation et Université Canada pour leur parrainage de la série de causeries Voir Grand. It's thanks to the generosity of these sponsors that we're able to make these events open to the public for all to enjoy. The Big Thinking series gives us a chance to engage in conversations about the most pressing issues of our time, and today is no exception. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Leroy Little Bear, who will, I have no doubt, challenge us as he compares Western academic metaphysics to Blackfoot cultural metaphysics. Now I would like to invite our friend and colleague, Ted Hewitt, President of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, to introduce Leroy Little Bear. Dr. Hewitt.
Bon après-midi et merci, Stephen. Thank you all for coming today. I'm very, very pleased to be here on behalf of all of my many colleagues from SSHRC who are here for this event. Stephen, I'd just like to start by echoing your acknowledgement that we are meeting today on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot and the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, as well as the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Le Conseil de recherche en sciences humaines est fier d'être partenaire du Congrès. Il est également fier d'être un fervent défenseur de la recherche, aussi bien autochtone que non autochtone. Le Conseil s'est d'ailleurs engagé à promouvoir et à soutenir la recherche en sciences humaines menée par et avec les peuples autochtones, un engagement qui fait partie intégrante de son mandat et son approche. In 2015, following an extensive collaboration with our Aboriginal Advisory Circle, SSHRC launched its Aboriginal Research Statement of Principles and related resources, including its definition of Aboriginal research, in support of Aboriginal research and talent. This ensures SSHRC's concept of scholarly excellence includes Indigenous perspectives, knowledge, methodologies, and approaches. It's with this in mind that I am particularly pleased to introduce the speaker for today's Big Thinking Lecture, my former colleague from the University of Lethbridge, Leroy Little Bear. The title of his talk is Big Thinking and Rethinking Blackfoot Metaphysics Waiting in the Wings, and I don't know about you, but I cannot wait to hear about this. Veteran educator, renowned academic, and longtime advocate for First Nations education, Dr. Leroy Little Bear is recognized as one of the continent's leaders in the advancement of North American Indian philosophy. Born and raised on the Blood Indian Reserve Kainai First Nation, Dr. Little Bear is a member of the Small Ropes Band of the Blood Indian tribe of the Blackfoot Confederacy. He is one of the first Native students to complete a program of study at the University of Lethbridge and completed a Juris Doctor Degree at the University of Utah's College of Law. Dr. Little Bear established the University of Lethbridge's Native American Studies Department, serving as its chair for more than 20 years and helping design the university's Bachelor of Management in First Nations Governance. He was also a founding director of Harvard University's Native American program. Dr. Little Bear has contributed to publications and reports for the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the Assembly of First Nations, and Alberta's task force on the criminal justice system and its impacts on the province's Indian and Métis peoples. He was awarded the National Aboriginal Achievement Award for Education in 2003, the highest honor bestowed by Canada's Aboriginal community. In 2006, he received an honorary doctorate from the University of Lethbridge. He's provided legal advice to numerous Aboriginal organizations on land claims, treaties, and hunting and fishing rights, and continues to explore research and scholarship in diverse areas. These include the relationships between Indigenous science and Western physics, and the exploration of Blackfoot knowledge through songs, stories, and landscape. Je vous invite maintenant à accueillir le professeur Leroy Little Bear. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Little Bear to the stage.
Nistuanakok, ikas kinewa, he nakseks, kanawa, saukitapio, and I know to sit up. I was just talking to you in Mongolian. I was introducing myself. My Blackfoot name is Lowhorn. I'm of the Small Robes Band. Belong to the Kainai, my tribe, and we're of the Blackfoot Confederacy. For those of you that are familiar with British Columbia and the First Nations that are over there, probably will find this interesting, and that is, I was just over there a few days ago, and we always tease each other. And I was telling my tribal brothers and sisters that being Blackfoot, I came over to see if I can find a place for a shoe swap, And incidentally, we all hear about the American primaries. I just heard on the news, Hillary wasn't very scared about Trump. She said she's got a Trump card. Anyways, we thought we'd talk to you in this big thinking of real light stuff, But hopefully, we'll be able to engage in what my granddaughter refers to as a deep conversation. And in the interest of time, let's get down to business. We titled our talk as Big Thinking, Rethinking, Blackfoot Metaphysics, Waiting in the Wings. And I was just doing that. What I want to talk about is a midlife crisis opportunity. And I'm looking at this from a positive point of view, and that is, we all know of people who have gone through midlife crisis. They ask themselves profound questions. Who am I? What am I doing? People talk about their jobs. I've been in this job, for 30 years. And I hate the damn job, But I'm stuck in it. I've got children to raise, to send to school. I've got a house to pay for. Other people say, hey, I'm going to sell everything, and I'm going to, go around the world. In other words, they say, I'm going to do something different. And of course, there are people, after reflecting on their lives, say, I love what I do, and, will continue. So, in Canada, we as a nation, seldom do we stop and really ask ourselves who we are as Canadians, about where we are going as a nation. Maybe things like Confederation, way back then, may have given us an opportunity as a nation to talk about who we really are, but we never did. Maybe Quebec separation causes us to blink a little bit, but the 1982 Constitution Act was another opportunity for us to talk about who we really are, but we never took that opportunity. In fact, my friend and I, we were talking to some upper bureaucrats involved in the constitutional debates, and we were asking them, what's Canadian? The response was, we're not American. And so, a midlife crisis opportunity is what I'm referring to as giving us an opportunity to talk about these types of things. There have been inquiries, studies, royal commissions, in Canada in the last 40, 50 years with regard to First Nations people. And yes, some of those, we blink a little bit, we hem and haw about it, but we never do anything. But it seems to me that the TRC is causing people to finally think about it. And I want to congratulate the Congress for including a whole bunch of sessions on the TRC. And it means that maybe finally we are going to stop and, talk about those things that really are going to make a difference. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission finally is causing people to stop and think. We may ask ourselves, what do universities have to do with what the TRC was talking about? Well, in my view, universities had to do a lot with the residential school era. It was the universities who were turning out the teachers. It was the universities who were turning out the Indian agents. It was the universities, as this was being said in another session about Duncan Campbell Scott. He was a product of the universities. It was the universities that were turning out the nuns and the priests, say. So the universities do have a lot to do with what the TRC was talking about. The TRC is really not what I want to talk to you about. I know what they're talking about, and I know that those horrific stories that are contained in their reports are true because I went to one of those schools. What I really want to talk to you about is metaphysics. Okay. What do I mean by metaphysics? Well, metaphysics are those things that are so embodied in us. They're ways of thinking. They are the foundational basis of our thinking process. And those thinking processes, in turn, are the foundational basis of our thoughts, of our behavior, about our relationships with other people, how we organize our society, and so forth. That's what metaphysics is all about. The metaphysics of our present existence, the metaphysics of our present existence, from a Blackfoot perspective, are based on, the metaphysics that we find from 400 or 500 years ago. At that time, there was a period that was called the Enlightenment. It was the Enlightenment I prefer to call the Age of Reason. And at that time, it was the church. It was the kings, the monarchs, and so on, that were the gatekeepers of knowledge. And the commoners did not have access to that knowledge. And so the commoners, so to speak, said, I don't have to go to those libraries. I can come to know things through pure reason. See? And that was kind of like the mental, epistemological revolution that took place as a result of the Age of Reason. That Age of Reason, when we look at it and look at our metaphysics today, what are those metaphysics? Well, from a Blackfoot person, let me tell you what those metaphysics look like. The Age of Reason, as we've said, came into being. It was a belief that we can come to know everything strictly through reason, as opposed to reliance on faith, on the past, intuition, and so on. It gave rise to what was known as deism. In other words, the church jumped on the bandwagon, and everything, it says, hey, reasoning is part of God's gift to us. God made an orderly universe, and it is good and beautiful. So one of the foundational bases in Western thought is that God does not play dice with the universe. In other words, deep in the mind of a Western thinker is that creation is stagnant. This is the way God made it, and that's the way it'll be for all eternity. See? And our job as humans is to try and discover that creation of God. See? So one of the foundational bases in Western thought is a stagnant world. The Age of Reason was a counter-movement, as we've said, to the divine rule of kings. It did away with the subjective and dealt only with the objective. It did away with emotions, feelings. And as I've mentioned a number of times to other audiences, women, for instance, suffered as a result of that because women are too feeling, women are, speak always from an intuitive perspective, and so on. They won't make good leaders. They won't make good scientists, see. So women were bypassed. Things like separation of church and state came in as a result of that. Now, things like mysticism, ghosts, and the like were frowned upon. But the scientific method was the product of the Age of Reason, where measurement was the rule of the day. I almost said ruler of the day. And a number of things have arisen out of that scientific method. In Western education, in Western thought, everything is brought about through what is known as propositional thinking. See, that's why we're always talking about theories. What's your hypothesis? See? And in science, the physicists have a standard model, okay? And they're trying to make sure that that standard model is not played around with, just like Einstein's work. Nobody messes that up. And things like, if any of you are familiar with physics, there was a search, a kind of continuing search for what is known as the Higgs particle. What is the Higgs particle? Well, very simply, we all are familiar with E equals mc squared, okay? Well, energy transforms into matter, but there's a stage in between that the energy goes through to be able to transform into matter. That middle stage is what the Higgs particle is about. And in fact, particle is a misnomer. It really is what is known as the Higgs field, an energy field, and so on. In other words, there is no room for anything that cannot be measured, nor is there room for subjectivity. Now, the ramifications, when we're talking about reflecting on those metaphysics and where they're taking us as humans, the ramifications are such that scholars such as Ian McGilchrist, who studies left and right brain thinking, suggests that we have become largely left brain thinkers. Our thinking is about control and manipulation, abstraction, anonymity, organizability, predictability, and financial balance sheets. So in other words, predictability, we want to become prophets, be able to predict what's going to happen, so on. In the process, justice gets interpreted simply as equality. The left brain does not understand things, but simply processes them. The right brain is the basis of understanding. The left brain prefers the explicit, not knowing that making things explicit is like explaining a good joke. You see the point, okay? Our approach to knowledge is largely declaratory and propositional, and it's not about experience at all. Well, benefits? Yes. people can, people that I've talked to say, but what about all the things that we've come up with as a result of those metaphysics? And I say, yeah, we've come up with a lot of comforts and so forth. But at what price? All we have to do is talk about pollution, oil sands, so on, to say at what price are those metaphysics taking us? We are not denying the benefits and advances brought about by our present left-brain metaphysics, but most of that is materiality. Is our present metaphysics improving and advancing our species? Are we happier? When I stop and think about that, I was just reading a little clip on evolution and the Neanderthal man. At one point, we were neighbors with Neanderthal. Where are they now? Say, are we going to be following the footsteps of Neanderthal too? Are we just a passing phase in the evolutionary scheme of things? Say, those are the kind of big thinking that we have to stop and reflect on. McGilchrist tells us of a teacher who was having to teach students how to read facial expressions. Why? Because students don't get to look at people in the face. They're all looking on screen. Can you imagine that? A teacher having to teach students how to read facial expressions. Question, where's our metaphysics taking us? Are we becoming increasingly robotized? There's such a word. Is that what we want to turn out of our universities? Our robots? Well, that's the kind of big thinking we need to stop and think about. There were challenges to the age of reason and to the Enlightenment. People like von Goethe came up and attempted to include in his science spirituality and so on. And he was quickly pushed aside. Today, there are people who are dealing with scientific theories like modified Newtonian dynamics. They're being pushed aside because they might spoil Einstein's work. See? In modified Newtonian dynamics, what those scientists are saying is that, hey, when we look at the Milky Way galaxy, which we're part of, we find that the speed at the center of the galaxy and the speed on the outside are the same. Well, if they're the same, what's relative? You need relative differences to have relativity. See? So, a big question on Einstein's theory. Okay? Big thinking. We should be thinking about that. In the early 1900s, quantum physics came on the scene. It was about uncertainty. It was, didn't quite do away with the notion of matter-particle. They came up with particle-wave duality, non-locality, constant motion, probability, spirituality. People like Jeremy Hayward talks about science and spirituality. Now, if we were to move on, the age of reason, if we were wanting to bring it home to the TRC, the age of reason was in full bloom when North America was being colonized, okay? And because Native science was about wholeness, spirituality, waves as opposed to particles, everything about being about relationships, and everything being animate, it was totally discounted by the rationalists. Because it was not about measurement and mathematics, it was nothing but mythology. And in the social sciences, that's what they refer to, native knowledge, traditional knowledge, as mythology. It was not taken seriously. But let's take a quick look. In the native metaphysics, it's about flux. It's about constant motion. In other words, an overlap with quantum physics. In quantum physics, we talk about probabilities. In native science, nothing is for certain. Everything is always changing. Everything is always in constant motion. That's one of the foundational bases. In native science, we're not about matter. We're not about particles. We are about energy waves. In other words, you and I are simply combinations of different energy waves that make for our existence. When we pass away, those energy waves, in other words, that particular combination is no longer in existence. You're no longer in existence. The waves are still there. In native thought, everything is about being alive. Everything is animate. Compared to Western thought, everything is inanimate, except, of course, for you and I. Everything is animate in the native world. That's why we talk about all my relations. All my relations is not talking about my human relations. I'm talking about those rocks out there, those trees out there, those birds and animals out there, the stars. They're all my relations. In other words, it's that ecological relational network that I'm referring to when we're talking about all my relations and that everything is animate. All my relations, everything is considered. Nothing is left out. We draw from a broad spectrum of information when we're talking about all my relations. One of the things about native science, native thought, is renewal. In our ceremonies, you will find that most of our ceremonies are about renewal. We sing the same songs, we tell the same stories, we do the same ceremonies year in, year out. And we never change those stories, okay? We've even gotten to telling the same jokes, But the thing is, that renewal has a lot of implications for education. Because in education, and the way we've organized our schools and our universities is such that, hey, we start down here, we come up in a hierarchical way and so on. I'm in grade 3 and I ask a grade 1 question. Teacher tells me, you should have known that. That's a grade 1 thing. You should have known that a long time ago. Get with the program. Say, well, that's what we mean by, I refer to it as been there, done, did it. see. Whereas in native ways, we always retell our stories. We repeat them. That's how they sink in and become embodied in the students and in the people. But another perspective on renewal is that we as humans live in a very narrow spectrum of ideal conditions. See? Those ideal conditions have to be there for us to exist. See? That's why it's very important to talk about ecology, the relationship. If those ideal conditions are not there, you and I are not going to last for very long. Just text Neanderthal, okay? Ask the dinosaurs, what happened to them? We asked one of our elders, why did those dinosaurs disappear? He thought about it for a while and he says, maybe they didn't do their ceremonies. So the thing is, we have to do those things. In other words, try and maintain those factors, those conditions that make for our existence. And it seems like we're working towards our own extinction by changing everything. And that's something we can never understand from a Blackfoot point of view. If God's work is so beautiful, why do we come along and try to change it all? Something that doesn't make sense to us. See? But renewal is a very, very important thing. And just eliminate something. Stop breathing for 20 minutes. Do you think you'll be alive very long? I don't think so. In other words, if we change any of those ideal conditions, we're not going to be around for very long. So the renewal aspect from a Blackfoot perspective says, hey, if we're going to continue to live, we need to maintain those factors that make for our existence. So native science really is directed at sustainability. Let's pass that message to Suncor. You know. Space, place. We're very space and place oriented in our thinking processes. Why? Because talking about that flux, everything changing all the time, well, the thing is, the most stable is the land. And knowing that the land is going to eventually change, but still, for the time being, the land is the most stable factor. That's why Native people are always talking about land, their relationship to land. In Western thought, what do we talk about? What's in the back of our minds? Time, see? And I can take time anywhere with me, see? But the place, I have to come to the place. That's the relationship with the land, okay? Language. All of the metaphysics are caught in the language. The language acts as a repository for all of that knowledge. So the thing is, in English, it's all about nouns, naming things. English is a fantastic language for categorizations and so on. Say, Blackfoot is about process, it's about actions. I always jokingly say, you won't even need a TV set if you were to hear Hockey Night in Canada in Blackfoot. Say, it describes the actions so much better than English does. So, I'll skip over this, but one of the things is that our way of thinking in Western thought is that it's, if God made this, and this is the way God made it, it's beautiful, it'll always stay that way. If there's any chaos, it's us causing the chaos, okay? Now, in Native thought, because the chaos is forever happening, we're trying to draw order out of it. Very quickly, I want to point out just some differences and so on to summarize those notions. Consciousness affects reality in quantum physics, but not in Newtonian physics. In the native science, yes, the same thing. When it comes to matter, it's a space-time curvature according to Einstein. In Blackfoot, it's just descriptions. Time is a space-time continuum. In Blackfoot, it just is. Matter, particle, wave duality. In Blackfoot, we're wave thinkers. Reality, there is no deep reality. In Blackfoot thinking, the reality is right here. It's all subjective. Cause and effect in Western thought is paradoxical. In Native thought, it's either all cause or all effect. The perspectives we take is, and the approach we take is, a very reductionist approach in Western thought. In Native thought, it's always holistic. We're always doing experiments. Native science does observations. And knowledge in Western thoughts, it's cumulative. In Native thought, you always have to renew the knowledge. Language is binary and mathematical. In Blackfoot, it's process-oriented. Okay. Now, current science research, I've mentioned the Higgs particle. Grand unified theory, I don't think will ever happen as long as we're sticking with the standard model. I don't think I do give a little bit of, hope to superstring theory because they're talking about motion. I've mentioned modified Newtonian dynamics and so on. Dark matter, for instance, that physicists are searching for, suggests that there's a uniform rotational speeds which do not affect Newtonian laws of gravity. But we find out that's not the case. The question we want to leave you with is, where is Western metaphysics taking us? We as Homo sapiens, are we better off as a result of it? Is it really advancing the reason for our existence, if we ever stop and think about it? Is our current metaphysics just another passing phase that's leading us down the gardening path? Maybe there are other metaphysics that we should take a good look at. And Western science is largely aimed at exploration. Native science is aimed at sustainability. We exist in a very narrow gap, as we've mentioned. And the fish, for instance, nobody's talked about the fish in this Congress, not that I know of. But the fish has been around. Think about it. Way before the dinosaurs, okay? Way before the Neanderthals, way before our time. The fish is still around. I wonder what scientific formula the fish has discovered. we should ask the fish. See? They've survived. Now, I won't worry about this. Blackfoot metaphysics, I have used Blackfoot metaphysics to compare it to quantum physics because the two have large areas of overlap. The question is, are our universities, as present gatekeepers of knowledge, just like the church and monarchs used to be? But what are we gatekeeping? Could it be that our left brain metaphysics is increasingly leading us to being tech schools and wandering further and further from our original mandate? In other words, the original mandate of universities was pursuit of knowledge. But today, we're becoming tech schools, say. And, you know, is that really what we want to be? Okay? Blackfoot metaphysics is waiting in the wings. That's something we need to come and discover. It's knowledge that's just waiting to be discovered. Thank you.
Well, I hope you won't mind me saying that that was enlightening. We have time for a couple of questions only, I'm afraid, but please, there are microphones on either aisle, and if you would just identify yourself and please pose a very quick question, and I would ask that the question be of the interrogatory nature. Thank you. Go ahead. Try and get that to work. Go ahead.
It's a wave microphone.
It is a wave microphone.
Well, thank you. That's a big change from my Facebook feed. It's been very enlightening indeed. I was just wondering, I couldn't help but to be thoroughly moved by what you were saying, and wondering if you're familiar with biocentrism, which posit consciousness as the primary reality in opposition to realism. Right, and it does seem to speak to the few of the points you were making, in particular that reality is first subjective and second real, and that consciousness is the first energy that affects what we perceive as reality. So I was wondering if you were aware of that paradigm and if you had applied the same reflection to it.
Well, when we're talking about a reality, and all those thoughts are, of course, are all psychological, okay? They're in this body and so on with a processor that we call the brain and so on. And of course, when I'm thinking in Blackfoot. And when I'm thinking in Blackfoot, I can't help but look at that panoramic view. Now, when I'm talking panoramic view, if you can just imagine yourself standing on top of a hill on the plains, you get that panoramic view. And you can begin to wonder what the relational network that exists there, okay, when you're looking from the top of the hill. So when we're talking reality, and we're talking about all these psychological theories and so on, the main answer I can come up with is, from a Blackfoot point of view, I'm always looking at things from that holistic point of view with the notion of relationships across, across the picture. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeff F. Hill. I represent Canoe, a Canada 150 project to create pan-Canadian undergraduate programs. I'm totally interested in what you're saying and think it's the right way to go. What kind of concrete, pragmatic steps do you think we can take towards renewal and indigenization over the next 5 years, let's say?
My best answer to that is learn Blackfoot. And the TRC saw the picture. That's the reason why in the TRC report there was mention after mention about the language. If you are going to be able to change ways of thinking, you've got to be able to change ways of thought. And the best way to change those thought processes is to think in a different language, okay? The late David Bohm, a physicist who was a student of Einstein and who I had the opportunity and the privilege to be able to have conversations with him, he was asking those questions 30 years ago and was saying to himself, we need to change the English language to a process language. And you can read about it in his writings. He refers to that changing of the English language as the real mode. Some of you might be familiar, might have seen that, but changing the language and thinking in a new language is the best way to accomplish this notion of renewal.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for a great talk. My name's Holly. I'm an MA student in philosophy at Carleton University. And I just came from a panel by the Equity Commission, or Committee of the Canadian Philosophical Association talking about decolonizing philosophy and the issues that are being faced in sort of attempts to bring in more non-European knowledge. And I really like the concept you brought up at the beginning of your talk of a midlife crisis opportunity. And how that's happening in sort of the national identity, but has not happened as much as it needs to. And I was wondering what you think it would take within philosophy as an academic discipline for that sort of midlife crisis opportunity to occur and the opening up to these sorts of philosophies, and particularly in metaphysics, that gatekeeping usually keeps out.
Well, my short answer would be there are a large number of native philosophers that are now blooming out there in the academic area. Ann Waters is one example. The late Vine Deloria was another example. And in fact, Vine Deloria speaks along the same lines. He's got a book out from a number of years ago talking about metaphysics of modern existence and so on. There's people like Burckhardt who talks about native philosophy and so on. And the best source is maybe right here in our university libraries at Glenbow, where you will see and be able to read these mythologies, so-called mythologies, where a lot of the philosophical content of Blackfoot thought, Cree thought, and so on are contained. So that's what I would advise in terms of talking to philosophers and how they can bring about the change. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, and we have time for one last question.
Hi, I'm Wyatt Anton. I'm a first-year MA here in the Department of Sociology. I've heard a lot about the significance of dreams in the First Nation reality and existence and spirituality. Can you tell us a little bit more about their significance?
Can you come with that again? Didn't quite.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the significance of dreams in Blackfoot metaphysics and First Nation perspective?
Yes. Good question. See, in Western thought, we limit ourselves, because of left brain thinking, we limit ourselves and our reality to the state of awakeness. See, the only thing that's real is what we would say, hey, just in a state of awakeness. But see, in native thought, in Blackfoot thought, we draw from a much broader spectrum of information. In other words, you and I are equipped the same with all our senses, all that sensory intake. Say, well, dreams are part of your actual experience. Dreams are part of your actual experience. So, dreams are not left out. I can look to dreams and say, I wonder what role that dream is playing in my overall life, in my overall reality, and so on. The birds flying certain ways, the birds behaving certain ways, and so on, other animals behaving. Those are all things that I would take into consideration, say. So in other words, what I draw on for what we would call reality is drawn from a much broader spectrum than just, the state of awakeness. See, we don't limit ourselves to that state of awakeness. And every once in a while, maybe each and every one of us have had experiences that we can't explain. And we try to tell friends, parents about them. And they say, oh, you're dreaming. That's not real. Remember when we were kids, we used to have our invisible playmates, okay? So but sure, we tell our kids that's not real, see? Push that aside. See, that's the kind of narrowing down when we're talking about reductionism. That's the kind of narrowing down that we do. Whereas in Blackfoot thought, it's wide open. Okay.
You've been very patient, and I think we do have time for one last question, and then we're going to stop, I promise. That's it. No one else stand up, please. Go ahead.
Merci. I wanted to offer a word in Blackfoot, and I know I'm not going to pronounce it right, but I've been initiated with following the scholars and that have been working in that field a long time to make us wait and so I want to say aoksi soatu. And how do we take that home now?
Just repeat it. I don't know if everybody heard your...
My pronunciation?
No.
Aoksi soatu. Visiting a place as an art of ethical renewal, and inspired by a lot of scholars that are here in the room, and a lot of the knowledge that has been to this land for all these times.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, and I'm glad people, have heard that. And lots of times, when we're even sometimes when we're alone, we say, in Blackfoot thought, we're never alone. We're always with those other spirits, those relational networks, and so on. And it seems that what you're saying is trying to establish those notions and so on. But because of our language, like English, let me very quickly explain this. This is one of the major blocks with the English language and notions of renewal and these kind of big thinking thoughts, is that English is very dichotomous. It's always either or, day, night, saint, sinner, white, black, and so on, animate and inanimate. See, and there's a watertight division in that dichotomy. You cannot be a saint and a sinner at the same time. See, you're always either or. See, well, the thing is, the division is watertight. You can't transcend it. Say, well, we have to find a way to transcend that watertight boundary or develop what I refer to as rites of passage, okay, around the boundary. And sometimes these take a little bit of time to explain, but as I was telling another audience earlier yesterday, I was telling them that watertight division, I play around with that in my philosophy classes, and I tell them, look, if I draw a dichotomy of good and evil, okay, and I give you a word, all right, you tell me if it's on the good or bad side. And I give them the word sex, okay, good or evil. Say, well, think about it. When we're young, growing up, especially if we're brought up in a good Christian tradition, sex is a sin, see? But when we get married, especially if we get married in the church, all of a sudden it's a sacred institution. See? How did that happen? How did that happen? See? Well, the thing is, from a dichotomist point of view, we did not transcend that watertight boundary. The watertight boundary is still there. What we've done is we've gone around it, around the edge of it. That's the rite of passage. In other words, getting married in church. Say, the wedding in the church is the rite of passage. Now, the question I threw out to the audience yesterday was, have we done the same for issues like racism? Have we done the same thing, the same kind of rites of passage for homelessness? Say, well, that's big thinking. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.